we're here today also to remember a good friend of the board, Sam Abdulaziz. Sam was a legal counsel to the board. He came to most of our meetings, not in that official capacity, but as an amicus, as a friend of the board, to help guide us through several years of issues that predominate and still are because of Sam. It didn't matter what the conversation was about. It could be relative to industry, it could be relative to labor, it could be relative to just basic goings-on, relative to contract law. I think board members would agree that Sam was a very approachable person. I personally found him not just charming, but self-effacing. He just was that kind of a person. When he would come to the meetings, he never drew attention to himself. You know, go around and the public would introduce themselves, and Sam would say, you know, he'd do that. He'd always do that arm wave. That's how I remember him, as a person that just really cared so much about what he did and about this board, and didn't need to show himself off in any way. I had, on November 16th at our executive committee meeting, I had the unfortunate responsibility of informing the board of his passing. And we're here also to just remember him as this really larger-than-life legal lion in the state of California. Well-versed, probably the legal expert in the area of construction law. We're also honoring Sam's family. They've introduced themselves. They're in the first two rows over here, and we're really glad you're here, and it's really our privilege to be able to do this today for Sam and for all of you. We have a 30 to 60 minute program, and Steve Sands is going to take over and lead us through that program, so thank you.
A couple of things. We have coffee because the heater went out in the hotel. It's kind of cool in here, so we have free coffee in back. Public comment session will be after this agenda item, in case there is some confusion about that. Today we have some speakers. I'll run through the scheduled list. Be myself, Matt Kelly, Dave Fote, Margie Green, Rick Pierce, Phil Vermeulen, Steve Latonin, Ken Grossbart, and Mike Abdulaziz. When I first was being considered to be registrar, the Davis administration wanted to vet me and, you know, see if the industry or labor would be okay with this guy from the Architects Board. Would he be okay to, you know, take over the Contractors Board? The first person I had to go visit was Sam Abdulaziz. And Lynn Morris, who was the Deputy Director for Board Relations, we flew down to Pasadena, had lunch with Sam. Of course, we paid for it. And had a lovely lunch. And, you know, I said, well, I hope I passed my first test. Well, I went back to my job as Executive Officer of the Architects Board, and 3 days later, I got the nicest letter from Sam saying, I really enjoyed lunch, nice meeting you, went on and on. He concluded by saying, by the way, after meeting you, I've decided to apply to be Registrar of the Contractors Board. So began a long friendship between Sam and myself. Sam was very generous. He was very nice. He was always going out of his way to be nice to the staff and the board members. I remember once he invited me down. I had a meeting down here, and he said, look, when you come down, I'll pick you up at your hotel. I'm going to take you to the Magic Castle. I don't know who's ever been there. It's where they have all the magicians and Holly. It's incredible. I said, look, I'll pick you up. I'll take you out to dinner. Then I'll take you to the Magic Castle. So Sam picked me up, took me to Carl's Jr.'s, made me pay, and took me to the Magic Castle. It was an incredible night. But finally, Sam, his generosity and love was expansive. My daughter was applying to go to UCLA, and, you know, Sam loved UCLA. You'll hear probably stories about Sam's relationship with the sports empire at UCLA, especially for those USC grads who will go unnamed or unmentioned. Anyway, Mike and Sam, my whole family came down. We were going to tour UCLA. So my wife Jan, my daughter Sarah, who was applying to UCLA, and my daughter Emily. And we went to Sam's office, which looks more like a sports museum than a law office. It's sports memorabilia everywhere. And we went to UCLA. And this is my 18-year-old and 16-year-old daughter. Sam takes us directly to the Hall of Fame. So we could spend the whole day looking at all the NCAA trophies that UCLA had earned over the years. I think UCLA has more NCAA championships than any other school in the country. Not USC, it's UCLA. Anyway, Sarah wasn't really sold on UCLA after spending her whole tour in the athletic department. However, she did get accepted to UCLA. She is a junior there now, and I can't thank Mike and Sam enough. And now there's another Bruin on the way to join Sam's legacy. And now I'd like to ask Matt Kelly to come up.
I don't know if I'm really qualified to say too many things about Sam, because honestly, he's somebody that I admired tremendously. I met Sam when I came to the board 10 years ago, and being an industry official, he and I hit it off right away. And it became apparent to me right away what he had done for the construction industry, unbeknownst to probably many of the vast majority of them. What he did for our industry was ensure that contractors were protected. He advocated for legislation that would ensure that contractors would have a mechanism to be paid, and that consumers would have a mechanism to protect themselves should the contractor do something that they weren't supposed to. Having spent my formative years in Southern California, I had a great affinity for the Southern California professional sports teams like Sam. So he absolutely was a fan of the greatest baseball organization that exists, the Los Angeles Dodgers. And having known that he went to fantasy camp with the Dodgers, I was forever envious of him. But truly, it was a friendship that probably would have never happened had I not been on this board. So it's another thing that I value this board for. And there's a beer, Dos Equis, uses a marketing program called The Most Interesting Man in the World. And I joked with him about it more than once and traded emails with him about believing that he was the most interesting man in the world, because he was a tremendous guy. Look at his family. He's got a great family. He's got a namesake in Mike's daughter, and I think that everybody is proud of him, more so than I could possibly say, and it was a pleasure knowing him. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dave Fote, and my remembrance of Sam it goes back to when I was hired by the Contractors Board as an investigator. It was based down here in Southern California, and an investigator named Connie Gontang, if I remember Connie, she introduced me to Sam, and she said, "This is Sam Abdulaziz. He's the godfather of construction, and he knows everything there is to know about contractors' law." And over the years, I found that to be true. But even more so, I found that he had a high level of integrity. He was always honest, and he really cared about the public, that being consumers, contractors, and enforcement staff. We agreed on 95% of the cases that we worked on together, but I want to share one with you. It had to do with a property management company. And Sam was adamant that they didn't need a license. And I said, "This is one case, Sam, where we're going to have to disagree. It looks like it's going to be me against you. You're the defense attorney. I'm going to represent the Contractors Board. We're going to put it in front of an administrative law judge, and we're going to let the judge decide this. Well, that was the first time I ever saw Sam in action as a trial attorney, and I learned a lesson that day. I think you can know what happened. Sam came out, he prevailed, the judge did not sustain. It was Judge Bernie Burns from Southern California, and he wrote an interesting response that, it's really complimenting Sam on his handling of this case. He did a fantastic job. And I guess my final thought is that over the years, I had a very close working relationship with Sam. People think I came in on Saturdays because I'm a workaholic. Not necessarily the case. I came in because I could always count on Sam to give me a call around 9 or 10 o'clock just to check in and see what's going on. So he was a great friend, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Margie Green with the Nevada State Contractors Board. And although I've known Sam for many years, it only took one meeting before I realized I had a friend for life. There was never a time that I could call him that he wouldn't return my call no matter how busy he was. He would take time and let me feel like I was the only person that was important to him at that time. I learned so much to him, and while we look at him as interested in the regulation of contractors, he was very much involved in consumer protection. He did more for consumer protection than I think anyone I know, by being fair, knowing that there are two sides to every story, and knowing the value of the Contractors Licensing Board and what it means to the public in both California, Nevada, and across the country. Everyone has some funny Sam stories, and I'm sure all of you do as well, but I remember one time we were at a NASCA conference in New Orleans, and we had gone out to dinner, and Nancy Mathias was with me, and Sam, and a couple of California representatives. Well, it happened to be Halloween in New Orleans, and quite a shock, even for me from Las Vegas. So as we were leaving, and all sorts of characters out on the street, the two of the colleagues from California left. But Sam was a true gentleman and professional, walked us back to our hotel room, while the other two had taken in the sights of New Orleans. He was a true gentleman, a true friend. We'll miss him dearly, and thank you for letting us share our moments about what Sam means to us. So thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Pierce, and I work for a company now called Basic Crafts. And just to give you a little idea how things move, you used to have a board member named Robert Alvarado that's now my supervisor. And I met Sam 29 years ago, surprisingly, when I worked for a contractor school called Licensed Information Service. And what you might not know, besides all the other wonderful things that Sam did, he also represented and apparently had some stock in a bonding company at one time. And the greatest, or one of the greatest compliments he ever paid me was in the mid-1990s after Theron Skiles, who was my mentor and boss at the contractor school, had passed away. He goes, neither you or Theron ever treated me like I was the competition. You always treated me like a friend. And I never thought of him as being a competitor. He was my friend. We did a whole bunch of things that I'm not going to bring up today because the family's here. and this really is what Sam did a lot of the time, was come to these meetings. And I want to be nice to you and say, these are the boringest things you can do with your life. But Sam was smart. He would bring paperwork from the office. He would bring the newspaper, always a sports section, and we always read in the back room. Back there now is Phil and Tony Frischetti. Those are the people we sat there and we talked about all of your business early in the morning, and then we talked about sports and real stuff the rest of the day during the meetings. Couple quick stories that I do want to share with you. Once I got to know Sam well, and the way I got to know Sam well is he would fly to Sacramento for the meeting in San Francisco. And I'd pick him up, and for the next 2 hours, we would talk about sports, and we'd talk about the Contractors Board, and we'd talk about my problems. It never seemed like Sam had a problem. He would make several phone calls to his office, to his children, to his father. Hi, how are you? At first, when he called me and would ask me how I was doing, and I would say fine, and then he would hang up, going, this is weird. But then I realized, A, he's an attorney, and time is money, and B, he really just wanted to know if I was okay and didn't care that, there was other business going on or that we're going to see each other tomorrow or something like that. But I got a chance to ride to San Francisco several times I drove. I thought it was kind of like his chauffeur in a little way. But anyway, pick him up at the airport, we'd go to the meetings. And one time we were having the meeting down in San Diego, and Sam decided to take the train. And so I call up Debbie, and I said, Debbie, we're picking up Sam at the train. How can we spoof him? And so her idea was we pick him up, and we got a limo, and we got a sign, and the sign said, King Abdul. And so myself and Bob Alvarado are hiding around the corner, and Sam comes off the train, and there's this huge man that is our chauffeur driver, and he's got this sign that says King Abdul, and you could just see Sam's face turn a little bit white, then a little bit red, and then searching for me and Bobby where we were at and why we were doing this to him, and it was a great spoof. I'm going to miss Sam, not nearly as much as the family and the partners and everyone, but I truly think I know a lot about you because when I did see Sam, we did talk about family. And a few years ago, when I got married, Sam and Joyce came up, and Bob Alvarado came to the marriage meeting, it's combination. And Bob Alvarado looks around and he goes, are you having a contractors board meeting? Because Steve was there, and Matt Kelly was there, and Sam was there, and it pretty much was a contractors board meeting, but we threw in a marriage at the same time. And we have a favorite picture of Sam, and that's a picture of him on our wedding day with his UCLA light blue t-shirt and Doris and I. And I just want to say thank you for sharing him with us all these years. I love you all and appreciate it. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Well, I'm Phil Vermeulen, and I'm here to tell you that I'm the blessed individual to have had a friend like Sam. I started coming to contractor board meetings in February of 1981. And when you start thinking about how many hours that was, well, how did we pass the time? Just like Rick said, if it wasn't for Sam, I don't know how I would have survived them all. Nothing against you guys, but those meetings kind of drag on. Now you multiply that since 1981, my God, that's a lot of time. Sam was the most caring person. I mean, he was so concerned about his friends. Like Rick said, he was always calling. I'd get calls several times a week. How you doing? You doing okay? That's what his comments were. Are you doing okay? He really, truly cared about his friends. And he loved his family. His family was so important to him. And he's just literally one of the most generous people I ever met. He was always trying to do things for me. For example, I'd be coming to Southern California, and so many games I got to go to. And when Sam went to the Rose Bowl to watch UCLA play, he was in the big boys tent with all the big important people because he was one of the very big important people. Seats on the 50-yard line. And then for the basketball games, I got to meet Coach Wooden because of Sam Abdulaziz. And Sam was so generous that he was concerned about all the players, that he donated a lot of his time to make sure that these college kids didn't go astray. I mean, that's how generous Sam was. And his impact on the construction industry is immeasurable. As a lobbyist for all these years, I leaned on him immensely, and he gave so much of his time working with me to make sure that the bills that we got through the legislature made sense, were good for the consumer, good for the contractor. It was a win-win for everybody. And as I said, he's really going to be missed. He was such a special guy. So
one of the big issues that we dealt with, and this goes back 25 years ago, the president of the applicant attorneys, a guy by the name of Gary Aguirre, and he and I were locked horns on this, and I can't even remember the bill, as a matter of fact, but we were locked, and Sam was helping me throughout this whole thing, and I unfortunately sat on the board of directors of our Cal SMAC at the time, our workers' comp company. So my wife and I had to go to the Cayman Islands for a board meeting, and we're over there, and I had been battling back and forth with this Gary Aguirre. What happens? We get a flower delivery one time in the Cayman Islands, and I'm looking at this gorgeous bouquet, and I go, what is this, you know? Open up the card and says, with love from Gary Aguirre. Sam had sent those to the Cayman Islands just to put a little dig into us. That was Sam, always the character. I could go on. I mean, how do you cap up somebody that you've known since 1981? But he was such a generous man, and we're all blessed and richly rewarded, and he'll always be in our memories. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Latonin. I've known, or had known Sam, I think we met in the mid-'70s in Los Angeles. Sam was very active with just about all of the trade associations, and certainly the Plumbing, Heating, Cooling Contractors was an association both as a state association and a group of local associations that Sam really was active and a tremendous help. I think he was the official attorney for at least 6 or 7 of our locals, and certainly for our state association. So I got to know him that way. I also got to know Sam as a business partner because we owned a small share in a newsletter operation, and it really wasn't much of an operation, but it was an opportunity for us, well, I should say for Sam to call me and tell me what I wasn't doing right most of the time. I think you'll find when people know Sam, you know, there was the friendship part, but the better friends you were with Sam, the more he was on your case just to make sure you were doing the right thing, that you were active. And certainly with regard to the Contractor State License Board, it was important to Sam that we all participate because it was a very important thing to our associations. It was important to the construction industry, and it was important to Sam. So he would call me, he would call Phil and say, are you guys going to be at the meeting? You have to be at the meeting. Well, the problem was Sam took care of everything so well, we didn't feel like we had to go to the meetings after a while. You know, it got to be where, for instance, in the, when Jerry Brown in his first term kind of took over and wanted to change things, he politicized the board to a great extent. You know, he put some people on the board that were there to make waves and shake the board up a little bit. And that started a relationship for many years. And Sam got so active that he was so impatient with the board that he started doing board minutes. And I tell you, until 4 or 5 years ago, those were the minutes we read. We didn't ever read your minutes. We read Sam's minutes. And he got a little impatient sometimes, and so he'd come in and I'd say, shouldn't you be over there doing your minutes? And he said, I wrote them last night. So, you know, that was Sam. It was in good humor, but it was also that he was so serious about what was happening with the board that from start to finish, even though Rick says that they were in the back reading the sports section, it was because Sam had already done all the thinking and talking, and he was prepared for what was going to happen that day at the board meeting. The other thing, of course, you know, everybody says being a friend of Sam's was a very personal matter. You know, I don't think it was an error that he knew in the association, he knew all of our staff. You know, he knew our wives, he knew our children. He made sure when he called to say, you know, how's Gretchen? How's Matt doing? And, that was a very personal touch. I always used to make a joke because he'd call and say, I'm going to be in Sacramento Monday. Why don't I stop by and we can, get up to speed? And I'd say, well, you're going to be in Sacramento Monday, but how many people are you going to see on Monday? Because I know that he would come up and in the course of one day, he'd see 20 people somehow. So I said, just fit me in between SMACNA and the roofing contractors, and I'll be fine. So, it's great for us to remember Sam. And certainly, as everybody said, the feelings that he had for the family were tremendous. We didn't get to see Joyce half as often as we would have liked to have seen her. But, Sam also thought coming to a license board meeting with us, he was there at the meeting all day, but then we'd go out and we'd stay out kind of late. And we'd have a few drinks, and I think we'd get boring. And I never could figure out how Sam could drink water and stay up till 2 o'clock with us, because we had to be the most obnoxious, boring people there were. But Sam was there right to the bitter end, because that's the way he was. If he was at a license board meeting, he was going to be there first thing in the morning till the last person was up at night. So we do miss Sam. So thankful for all of the family to show up here so that we can share these memories. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Grossbart, and I have the great pleasure of being Sam's law partner since 1979. Not a partner at that point, but shortly thereafter. But Sam and I worked together in the legal field since 1978, when I law clerked for him before I became an attorney, and then had the great pleasure of not having to send more than one resume out. That was him. He hired me on the spot, didn't have to pound the pavement looking for a job. I can give you a lot of Sam stories, having the pleasure of working with him every single day for over 30 years. But I'll leave that to the guys and gals who know him as well. What I'm here for, besides stepping aside my USC allegiance, as being a Trojan alumni, I guess this is not the right place to be today. I'm actually here to thank you, thank the board, thank the state of California. I know most of you, certainly the guys in the back row, because of Sam. I didn't get out much when he was actively working, because he took care of every single board meeting. It was his family, his second family. He loved it more than anything else. I would have loved to have been part of all of the fun that you guys talk about. I would have been sitting next to him drinking a glass of water as well. But nonetheless, this is so very, very nice of the board. Steve, you were a great friend to Sam. Everyone on the board was a great friend to Sam. I feel like I've known almost every single registrar since he trained, it seemed like, every single registrar preceding you. And I'm trying my best to take over and fill his shoes, which, as you can hear, is a virtual impossibility. He was just a great man, a great friend. I've come to know him, obviously, and I know his family. Both Debbie and Mike work for our office and have for years, and I've become very close with them. And I want to thank you all again very, very much for taking the time out of this particular meeting and paying tribute to him. Thank you again.
I'll make this real quick. This meant a lot to me and the family, mostly because you guys meant so much to my dad. He truly loved the board and the industry, and I think that's why he loved his work so much, was because he loved you guys. And so I just thank you from all of us. Well, to close, I want to thank all the speakers who I think did an excellent job, but I really want to thank the family and Bruce and Ken for coming. It's an honor to have you. It's an honor to be able to do this. I want to thank you for allowing us to remember Sam in this way. So thank you very much.